So difficult discussions, and that's the president's description, are expected between the two leaders. The U.S. trade deficit with China that the president campaigned heavily on and his base wants to see some toughness on, along with tensions in the South China Sea, and last but certainly not least, the threat of nuclear attack from North Korea. Let's bring in the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, who knows about all of these things. But to the breaking news that happened in just the last hour, Richard, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, said this about Syria. This is a serious matter regarding the chemical weapons attack that killed more than 50 people and requires a, quote, serious response. The markets started coming well off their highs of the session. He also said, no doubt the Syrian regime and Assad are behind the chemical attack. And now there are reports, Washington Post saying, could be a military response. What are you predicting?
I think there most likely will be a military response. I think it's a good thing. I don't think anybody should be able to use a weapon of mass destruction with impunity. That only encourages them to do it again, or others to take note, and the others could include North Korea. So I think it's important. I actually thought it was the biggest mistake of Barack Obama's presidency that he let Syrian use of chemical weapons pass without a military response. So it's actually a real opportunity for Donald Trump to basically say history is not going to repeat itself. Things are different now, and I actually think that would be welcome throughout the region and indeed much of the world.
Well, before we move to North Korea and China, John McCain adding the pile on here, he issued a release that immediately caught my eye, and he is recommending grounding the Syrian Air Force, which is code for let's just bomb them, while they're on the ground so that they can't drop these chemical weapons. He says this is a test of the new administration that they drop the chemical weapon, but also for our entire country. Assad is trying to see what he can get away with. Do you think that we're going to pull off some bombing and try and do that very thing, ground Syrian Air Force jets?
Well, we could do it with cruise missiles. We could do it with American aircraft. With American aircraft, you run slightly greater risk of some type of an incident with Russian aircraft. But I would think one way or another we'll make it difficult for some of all of Syria's planes to fly. We might also give some air defense systems to certain Sunni groups operating in Syria. So again, I think it's important, Liz, that we respond. We're not talking about going to war. We're not talking about regime change at this point. We're not quite ready for that. But I do think, again, it's important that when someone acts way over the line, as the Syrian government has done here, that they not be able to escape cost-free.
Oh, it's horrifying, the pictures. To the meeting with Xi Jinping, which is probably just a few minutes away, the president faces pressure to do a very delicate dance here. Pressure from his base to deal with the Chinese harshly regarding what he has always said was a very unfair trade balance of $300 billion. Chinese dumping of all kinds of steel and things like that, but also the geopolitical standpoint where China as a partner against North Korea and its saber-rattling would be helpful. Which one does he tackle?
Well, sometimes when you're president, you don't have the option of choosing. He's going to have to tackle both. But we're not going to eliminate or even meaningfully reduce the trade imbalance. You know, and I expect your viewers understand the many fundamental reasons we have it. So I think the Chinese will agree to do some extra purchases here, some investments here, which will help on the employment front. I think also the United States should press China to reduce some of the subsidies it gives to certain of its firms, stop stealing intellectual property and so forth. So I think by the end of this, we'll have a slightly more level playing field. And then they'll have the opening conversation about North Korea. China says it doesn't have much in the way of influence. That's not true. They have enormous influence if they choose to use it, and that's the big if. So the president's going to have to put down some markers and make it clear that's going to be the real test of whether China is willing to have a cooperative relationship with the United States.
Richard Haass of the Council on Foreign Relations, thank you so much for your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you.